is it so dark at the back? Switch on the lights. Now I can see you. Okay, so this morning we were talking about the sitting meditation. So using the rising falling, noting rising falling as the primary object. Okay? So as we said, rising falling is a suitable object for development of mindfulness, of concentration, and even of clear knowledge, because it's a simple object. Simple, just up and down, rising, falling. It's also gross, so easy for the mind to discern and to note clearly. Now, but while rising falling may be a suitable object for development of vipassana, but there are yogis, some yogis who for various reasons they may have difficulty in taking rising falling as an object, difficulty to discern the rising falling. So and sometimes even you can discern, but often you cannot find it. So sometimes you can see it, sometimes you cannot see it. So most of the time you find yourself struggling to find the rising falling. So this can happen for various reasons. So for some yogis, it's because often you see even though rising falling can be gross in the beginning, but as your mind begins to settle down into calmness, peacefulness, so rising falling can also become subtle. So when it becomes subtle, and if you are not making enough effort to note the subtle rising falling, then you may not be able to follow it clearly. So in this case, the remedy is very simple: increase effort. Increase effort to note. Increase effort, but soften the mind. Soften the mind and not with this extra effort to feel carefully into the movement. So in order to feel clearly subtle objects, so the mind needs to be soft. If your mind is hard, rigid, tense, it's very difficult to feel and discern subtle objects. So if rising falling becomes subtle, your noting mind also must you must refine the noting mind, make it soft, relax, feel carefully. So but with the extra effort to feel. So you make effort to feel carefully. Don't make effort to force the mind or force the breathing to become gross. So you have to relax the mind, soft, relax, let the mind sink into it, open, feel, tune into it, and then gradually you'll be able to discern even the subtle objects. So And another reason, this one we talk about it this morning. So, yeah, trying to find the rising, falling, where it is not happening. Okay? So if you are rising, falling, it's occurring on the chest, but you are trying to find it in the abdomen. Then no matter how hard you try to find, it's not there. It's not there. Okay, so you try too hard, you end up with stress. Okay, so in this case, you have to note the rising, falling wherever it appears most clearly to you. Okay, if it's not in the abdomen, don't force it to be at the abdomen. You only end up stressing up yourself, end up with tension. Okay? So if occurring at the chest, then note it at the chest. Okay? Another reason is simply because some yogis, either the body is very thin, or your breathing is too shallow. Okay? So your body is thin and your breathing is shallow, there will be hardly any movement at all. Just a little bit only. Okay? So so that's another reason. Okay? And also for some people, some yogis, because when they are noting rising, falling, unconsciously, they are trying to control the breathing. Okay? So this happens especially to yogis who are very pushy. So instead of just letting the breath occur naturally and to note the movement connected with the breathing as it occurs naturally. Okay? So you are not satisfied. You want to see more clearly. It's not clear enough. Then unconsciously you try to control. Breathe harder. Make the breathing more gross. Make the rising, falling more gross. Okay? But when you do that, you force the breathing too hard. Your body becomes tense, become tight. Your mind becomes hard and rigid. Okay? Then it will be difficult to discern any object clearly. Okay? So in this case, you need to be aware, mindful of the mental tendency to control the object. Okay? So in Vipassana, when you know the object, you let it be as it is. Okay? So Buddha always say to discern clearly as it is. Right? So to discern it as it is, you must allow it to be as it is. You must not try to control it in any way. Okay? So rising, falling, and let it occur naturally. It will occur naturally if you just leave it be. You just sit there. Eventually you have to breathe. Right? So when you breathe naturally, it rises. Right? Then you cannot hold your breath forever. Eventually you have to breathe out. So you breathe up, naturally it falls. So you just allow it to go naturally, breathe in, breathe out. Then rising, falling occur naturally. And when it occur, when rising occur, you just take note. Your job is just to take note. Not to interfere, not to get involved. Just to take note clearly and to follow it, take note continuously, clearly, from beginning to the end. Okay? So you have to be like the what they call the passive observer. You just step aside, let things occur. Rising occur, just step aside and watch it. Okay? falling occur, step aside, let it happen, but watch it. Take note of it carefully. Okay? So, so you have to take note. If there's any tendency to control, to grab strongly at the object. Okay? So note that tendency. We note it, it disappears, and mind let go. And then become balance again. Okay? Now, if you find, for whatever reason, if you have difficulty in discerning rising, falling, so if your rising, falling is not clear, okay? So now, don't wait for it to become clear, or wait for it to come back. Some yogis report, I can't. Rising, falling, not clear. So I sit there, I wait and wait and wait for it to come back. That is waiting, that is not meditating. Okay? Meditation, what is meditation? Noting is meditation. Okay? When you are waiting, you are not noting. That means you are not meditating. You are not developing your practice. Okay? So don't wait. Don't sit there and wait. When is it going to come back? When is it going to come back? Okay? So if find it's not clear, it's not there, then immediately you can switch to note an alternative primary object. Okay? What is the alternative primary object? Yes. Sitting, touching. Yes. So Vipassana meditation, we have a choice. We always have a choice. Not samatha, you only pick one object. You always have to note that object. Example, you note kasina. That's your only object. You always have to. Is that object or no object? Right? Vipassana. You can choose. There are other objects. Okay? Actually, Vipassana, because there are a lot of arguments about what is Vipassana object, what is not Vipassana object. Some say this is rising, falling is Vipassana object. Some say it is not. Some say sitting, touching is not Vipassana. You must always go back to rising, falling. So let's clear this once and for all. There are only two objects in Vipassana. Okay? So actually you want to talk about it, it's only one object. Reality as it is. Okay? But you say reality as it is, what is reality? So we divide it into two: mental, physical reality. Okay? Mental, physical nature. Nama, rupa, dhamma. Nama, dhamma, mental nature. Rupa, dhamma, material nature. Okay? Only two. If you are noting material nature, that's a Vipassana object. You are noting mental nature, that's Vipassana object. Okay? Material nature, very simple. We'll talk more about this later. But material nature like what? Hardness, softness, roughness, smoothness, heat, cold, pressure, tightness, stiffness, physical tension. So then cohesion, binding, flowing, fluidity, heaviness, lightness. These are all material nature. Okay? Even sound is a material nature. Light, colors, These are all material nature, rupa dhamma. They all come under material aggregate, rupa kanda. Okay? So then you have nama dhamma. This mental nature. Mental nature like feeling, vedana, perception. It means recognizing. Okay? When you're noting, you're recognizing. It's rising, this is falling, this is hardness, this is pressure. That's sanya. Recognizing. Okay? So knowing, that's citta, knowing. People say citta nupassana. You are noting the knowing mind. Okay? That's mental nature. Even the noting mind also, mindfulness, perception, the vitaka vichara, application of mind, sustaining of the mind on the object. These are all mental states. They are nama dhamma, mental nature. Okay? So if you are noting all this mental nature, you are noting a vipassana object. Okay? You can develop vipassana by noting this object. So only two. So you want to know whether object is vipassana object, then ask yourself, is this object mental or physical nature? If it is mental or physical nature, then it is a vipassana object. Okay? So you note rising, falling. What is it? Mainly, it is the wind element, right? And the support. When it rises, you feel the support, the pressure, tightness, the movement. So when it falls, it weakens. So it loosens up, right? The pressure reduces, the support weakens. Okay? So that's the wind element. That's a vipassana object. Okay? Gradually, as you develop the noting mind, as the noting mind becomes clearer and clearer, even as you're noting rising, or falling, you may notice not just the object, but you may notice also the mind that is noting the object. Okay? Or you may notice the mind that's knowing the object. That is nama, mental nature. So when you are noting rising, falling, you are actually noting mental and physical nature. Okay? So it's a vipassana object. Okay? So similarly, sitting, touching is also vipassana object. Okay? Sitting is primarily the wind element. Okay? Touching is various elements. Is our physical, material nature. Okay? So as you are noting, when the mind is clear, you can also notice the mind that is noting, or the mind that is knowing the object. Okay? So both mental, physical nature are present in the experience when you're not sitting and touching. Okay? So it's vipassana object. Therefore, by noting this, you can develop vipassana. Okay? So now you know how to judge whether an object is a vipassana object. Okay? Then you know this, no argument, very easy. So okay, now come back to this sitting, touching. Okay? So sitting, touching, again very simple. Right? There's only two objects, sitting and touching. Now, so first, I talk about sitting. What is sitting? What do you know? Sitting refers to the sitting posture. Okay? I mean the body in the sitting posture. Okay? So when you're not sitting, what you do is you note the uprightness of the body, the sensation of uprightness, while you're in the body is in the sitting posture. Okay, so you bring your attention to the body in the upright posture. Okay, and then you make effort to feel, to take note of the sensation, the physical sensation, connected with the body in the upright posture. Okay? So you can feel, you bring your attention to the body as you are seated, you can feel there's like a physical force that is holding the body upright. So you can feel it as a sensation of support. There's something supporting it, holding it up. Okay? Sometimes you feel that stiffness, or tightness, or rigidity. Okay? So in the beginning it may not be so clear. So it's usually clearest along the spine. Okay? So one way to try to get this object of sitting, so you can like allow your body to slouch first. So instead of sitting upright, you slouch. So you slouch, it's very heavy down. And then you bring up the intention to bring the body upright. So as you bring the body upright, you feel there is this force that's bringing it up, supporting it. So you do this a few times, then you can slowly feel that sensation of support. Okay? So even your arms also. So when it's like this, it's relaxed. Then you bring up the intention to bring it up. As it come out, you feel there's a force, right, supporting it up, bring it up. So that's the wind element, the element of support. Okay, so when your body is seated there, there is this element of support, holding it up. So you bring your awareness to that sensation of that support. Okay? So you feel, you note that sensation. Okay? Can you feel it? You see, without this support, what happened? You won't be able to sit upright. Your whole body will collapse. Right? So you don't collapse, at least you will slouch. So like when you're sleepy and the mind is weak, when the mind is weak, the wind element also become weak. Why? Because it's the mind that produces this wind element that holds the body up. You're sleepy, and mind is weak, the body start to collapse. Because the wind element become weak. So you're slouching, you bring up the intention to straighten the body. Okay? Then you can feel that support. Okay? So you bring your attention to that sensation of support, the force that's holding it up. Okay? Then you note that. You can label sitting. Okay? But you take note of that force of support. Okay? There's nothing sitting. Okay? The uprightness. Okay? So then touching. So touching is simply the experience of touching. Experience of touch is occurring in various points of touching in the body. So as you are seated on your meditation seat, you can feel the buttock is touching the meditation seat. So that is a touch point. Your legs also touching, right? Left leg, right leg, it's touching. That's point of touch. Your hands also touching. So there's an experience of touch there. Okay, depending on how you place your hand. You place it like this, there's only this one touch point. Okay, some place like this, and then there's two touch points. Okay, so sometimes the lips also is touching. So when you're not touching, you bring your attention to the point of touch. Okay, and then you use your mind to feel this physical sensation that is present. Okay, feel it, take note of it. Okay, so like if you put your hand as an exercise now, you put your hand on the floor. Bring your attention. Your hand is touching the floor, right? So bring your attention to that experience of touch. Okay? Feel. Open up your mind. Feel. Take note of whatever is present. Whatever physical sensation is present. So, what do you feel? Hardness, coldness. So what else? Smoothness. You see? Do you have to think? You don't have to think, right? Just put your attention there, and the mind is connected with it clearly. Immediately the mind can pick up all these different physical sensations. You're picking up the nature of the elements. The coldness, the fire element, hardness, the earth element. So just put the mind there, and the mind will pick up by itself. Very simple nature, simple physical qualities. Okay? So whatever is there, the mind just pick up. Okay? You don't search for a particular one. Whatever appear, when you bring your mind there, just take note. And you can just put the label touching. Okay? So there's nothing of touching. Okay? Now, to not sitting touching as a primary object, first you have to choose touch points. Okay? To start with, you can choose 2 or 3 touch points. Okay? So now when you choose the touch points, okay, choose the touch point where the sensation is very clear. Okay? So the sensation is distinct, clear, and the mind can easily discern it. Okay? So don't choose a touch point where it's not clear. So you're not, where you note it, because it's so subtle, and you have to try to figure out what it is. Don't choose such a touch point. Okay? Choose a touch point where it's clear. The moment you know what it is. Okay? And also choose touch points that are not too close together. Okay, because especially in beginning, when your noting mind is still not sharp and precise and clear enough. If you choose touch point that are too close together, you may mix them up. So like for example, some yogis note the buttock, right buttock, left buttock, there are two touch points, but they are so close together sometimes your mind is not sharp or precise or clear. Am I noting the right or the left? You'll mix up together. So choose touch point that are far away from each other, so that you definitely will not mix them up. Okay, so if you want to note touch point that are close together, you take them as one whole place. Like you want to note, let's say the buttock, note the whole thing, the whole area as one instead of two. Okay. Okay. So let's say you choose a touch point. Let's say you place your hand separately, so there are two touch points. Okay? So right hand touching, left hand touching, two touch points. Okay? And maybe third touch point, maybe you choose buttock as a whole. So you have three touch points. Okay? So you have to choose your touch point. Okay? So when you note sitting touching, so what you do is you alternate. When you begin, you alternate between noting of sitting and noting of touching. Okay, so you start with sitting. So bring your awareness to the body in the upright position. Okay, and feel the force, the uprightness, the support. Okay, and you note sitting, 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 sitting. So you note about 7, 8 noting. Okay, roughly. Okay, don't have to count. Don't have to be precise. Just roughly 7, 8 times. Okay, don't count, because if you count, you start to get caught up with the counting instead of the noting. Okay. So just note sitting, 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 sitting. When you note, your mind must be precise. Okay, exactly on that sensation of support. Okay, so I to note as precisely, as clearly as you can every time you note. Okay, note continuously. Okay, so don't note sitting and then stop, and then sitting, stop. Okay. Sitting, 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 again and again. Apply the mindfulness repeatedly. Okay. Then after 7, 8 notings, then you switch to the first touch point. Let's say the right hand touching. Okay. So when you switch, you must switch immediately. There must be no gap in the noting. Remember. And the moment you note sitting, finish, immediately the mind goes to touching. Okay, so don't sitting, sitting, sitting. You rest, and then touching, touching, touching. You rest. No, it must be immediate. Okay, no rest for the noting. Okay, so then you note touching, touching, touching. Bring your awareness to the touch point. Feel carefully the sensation present. Right? And not touching, touching, touching. About 7, 8 times roughly. Okay? Then after that, go back to sitting. Okay? So again, sitting, 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 7, 8 times. Then you switch again to the next touch point. The left hand touching. Not touching, touching, touching. Then again switch back to sitting. Okay? Then after that, again switch to the touching, the third touch point, the buttock, the touching, touching, touching. Then switch back to sitting. So you alternate between sitting and the touch point, noting of sitting and noting of the touch point. Okay, so at the touch point you go systematically. Okay, so you rotate among them systematically. Okay, so you're sitting, then first touch point, then back to sitting, second touch point, then back to sitting, then third touch point, and then back to sitting. Then after that, go back to the first touch point. Okay, and start again like this. Yeah, so rotate among them systematically. Okay, and don't go here and there as you like. Okay, discipline the noting. Okay. So each time when you note, whether it's noting sitting or noting touching, you have to put energy into the noting. Okay? Make effort. Make effort to do what? Not to force the mind to know, but make effort to feel carefully. Make effort to tune the awareness into the object and feel it as precisely, as clearly as you can. Okay? So, so by putting effort into each noting, each moment of noting, noting each sensation that arises precisely and clearly, the mindfulness gradually develop. So it's gradually develop its strength, because every moment you're putting effort into it. Okay. You don't put effort into the noting, you just simply aware of it superficially, the mindfulness will not develop. It will not be firmly established. Okay, so every moment where you not make sure awareness is firmly established on it, that's mindfulness, and then there is that sampajanya, the clarity of mind that discern clearly. And nature, when you're not sitting, discern clearly. Nature of the support. You're not touching, discern clearly whatever physical sensation present in the experience of touching. It's a moment to moment. Make effort to engage the mind, to investigate, explore into the nature that is being noted in the moment. So by doing so, mindfulness, sati sampajanya will develop gradually. So, so in the beginning, of course, you need to exert the mind to note. Every moment you need to exert the mind to note. Otherwise, you don't exert the mind to note continuously. Sitting a few times, then the mind fly off, wander off. Okay, even when switching, also especially, sitting when you want to switch, that's the time when the mind also wander off. Okay, so you have to keep exerting the mind to keep continuously note. Okay, to sustain the continuous noting. From sitting, to touching, back to sitting, again and again. You have to keep it going, keep it flowing, okay, continuously. So with continuous energetic noting, so after some time, mindfulness becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Able to note more and more continuously, smoothly. Okay, so you're able to remain easily with the noting of each sitting, each touching. Okay, when you're not sitting, and the mindfulness is strong, it firmly established there. It doesn't run away. It keep it. It doesn't forget this object. Sitting continuously, stay with it, established there. Okay. When you switch also, it switch very easily, very smoothly, and then it established on the touching. Okay? goes on noting, touching continuously. Okay, so you are able to switch back and forth between sitting and touching very easily. Okay, without getting lost, without the mind wandering away. Okay, so the mindfulness starts to flow smoothly. Okay? After some time, in the beginning, it's like get stuck again and again. The mind wander off. You have to start again. You wander off. You have to start again. Okay? After some time, when it develop, it start to flow smoothly. Sitting, sitting, sitting. Flow to touching, touching, touching. Flow back. Sitting, sitting, sitting. Flow again. The touching, touching. Very smoothly, continuously. So once you find that the mindfulness is continuous, it can flow smoothly, then if you want, you find that a particular object, whether it's a sitting or a touch point, is clear, is especially clear, then you can continue to note that object for maybe a few minutes continuously before you switch. Okay, in beginning you switch, 7, 8 noting you switch, right? So, but once it's developed and you find that one of the object is clear, you can stay with it for a few minutes. Note it continuously. Allow the mind to sink in clearer and clearer and clearer. Okay, before you switch. Okay. And then the secondary objects, they are handled in the same way as we described this morning in the case of rising, falling. Okay? So that means if the secondary object that arises is not prominent, it does not pull your attention away from noting or sitting, touching, and then you can ignore them. Stay with noting of sitting, touching. Okay, so a sound, physical sensation in the body, if it's not prominent, not clear, just ignore them. Okay, stay with sitting, touching. Okay, but if they are prominent, so strong, it pulls your attention away from noting or sitting, touching, then you must turn your attention completely to that object and note until it disappears. Okay, and then immediately go back to noting, sitting, touching. Okay, and then state of mind, wandering, restlessness, desire, aversion, and so on. So any state of mind connected with the 5 hindrances must be noted immediately. Okay, so whether they are strong or not, note them. Okay, note until they disappear. Okay, then go back to sitting, touching. Okay. Okay, now as you are noting, sitting, touching, sometimes the rising, falling becomes clear again. Because when you are, as you are noting rising, falling, I mean the sitting, touching, after a while the mind starts to calm down. Okay? Mind and body starts to calm down, become relaxed. Then you find the breathing becomes smooth again. Okay? When breathing becomes smooth again, rising, falling becomes clear. Okay. Also, sometimes for those yogis who cannot find rising, falling because they are controlling the breath, right? So when they turn their attention away from the breathing, sitting, touching, the mind let go of the control. Then the breath becomes clear again by itself. Okay? So once if the rising falling becomes clear again, then you can return to noting the rising falling again. Okay, but if the rising falling again becomes not clear, after you return to it, after a while again become not clear, then you can go back to note the sitting, touching. Okay, but if you find that each time you go back to note rising, falling, it becomes not clear again. Constant, so you find yourself constantly going back and forth, noting rising, falling, sitting, touching, then back to rising, falling, back to sitting, touching. Because the rising, falling keep disappearing and not clear. Then in that case, you might as well just stick with noting, sitting, touching. Okay, don't go back and forth. Because you go back, rising, falling, again it disappears, right? So just stick with sitting, touching. Okay, or if you find that as you're not sitting, touching, the practice is developing, mindfulness is developing, concentration is developing, clear knowledge is developing, then that means it's a good object for you, suitable for you. Then in that case, stay with the sitting, touching. Don't go back to the rising, falling. Okay? So as we said just now, sitting, touching is a valid vipassana object. By noting it, you can develop insight, can develop vipassana jnana. Okay? So it's nama rupa. So it's a valid object to develop vipassana. Now, noting of sitting, touching is not just helpful when the rising, falling is not clear, or when it's difficult to discern the rising, falling. So noting of sitting, touching can also be helpful when you need to bring up more energy in the noting mind. Okay? So by noting, sitting, touching, it can help to arouse the noting energy, because it's very active noting. You're switching from sitting to touching, back to sitting, and so on. So can help, because every time you switch, you're exercising vitakka, application of mind. Okay, so vitakka can help bring up the energy. So you're not sitting. Every time you're not sitting, you're applying the mind. Apply. Just bring up energy. Okay, switch to touching. Every time you're not touching, the vitakka is active. Applying on the object, applying. That brings up energy. Okay. So it can help to arouse the noting energy. So for example, after noting rising, falling for some time, and the mind begins to settle down, becomes more and more calm and peaceful. So some yogis they start to have the tendency to just rest in the state of calmness, peacefulness, without much noting. It's so nice, so wonderful. Okay? Then you just rest there, the energy of the noting starts to reduce, comes down. Okay? So then there cause an imbalance in the mental faculty. There's too much calmness, not enough energy. Okay? So you need to balance that imbalance in the faculty, by bringing up more noting energy. Okay. So now, for an experienced yogi, yogi who is skillful in their practice, you may be able to use that's your willpower to bring up more energy to energize your noting mind. Okay? But for beginners, usually this is something very difficult. Difficult to bring up energy in such a condition by sheer willpower. Okay? Because when the mind is becoming calmer and calmer, and the energy level going down, the whole mind is like it's stuck in a mud, stuck in a pool of thick mud. And very difficult to pull the mind out of it. Okay, so for inexperienced yogis who are beginners, usually willpower alone not enough. So to pull the mind out of this so-called rut. So you need a stronger method. Okay, so the stronger method is switch to noting, sitting, touching. Okay, so but in this case, because you want to bring out energy, you have to increase the touch points. Okay, not just 2 or 3. Increase the touch point. The 5, 6 touch point. So or more if necessary. Okay, because you want to make the mind work. Okay, by noting a lot of touch points. And keep switching between sitting, touching, many touch points. So you make the mind work. Bring out a lot of vitaka, apply again and again and again. Okay? So then gradually you bring up the noting energy. The noting mind becomes active again. Okay? So it balances the calmness and the peacefulness. Okay? So usually this is also the method that we apply to deal with tinamida, sloth and torpor. So when there's drowsiness or sleepiness or laziness in the mind don't want to work, then you make it work. By switching to noting, sitting, touching. Okay? So don't allow it to become lazy. Make it work. So it bring up the energy. Okay? Now, if your primary object is sitting, touching, then actually you can use the number of touch points to adjust the level of your noting energy. Okay, so that's an advantage in noting, sitting, touching. You can adjust the energy level by adjusting the number of touch points. Okay, so you have not enough energy, you find that noting energy not enough, then you can increase the touch points. Okay? So make the mind work harder, then bring up the noting energy. Okay? So, but you find too much energy, the mind starts to become unstable, right? Become restless. Then you can reduce the number of touch points. Okay? So you can adjust accordingly, according to what you need at that time. Okay? So you can adjust the energy, the noting energy, by either increasing or decreasing the number of touch points. Okay? Now, energy level is often also correlated with concentration level, a level of samadhi. Therefore, you can also use the number of touch points to regulate the level of the samadhi. Okay? So if there's too much samadhi, what happens? The mind, because samadhi is nature, is calm, is peaceful, is still. Right? But too much of samadhi, the mind becomes too still, too peaceful. Okay? So mind is peaceful, is at ease, but it's like still, too still, it's like frozen. Cannot move, cannot work. Okay? It's not doing much work to note clearly. So in this case, you need to balance this by increasing the energy to counter the samadhi. How do you increase the energy? You increase the touch points to note. Okay? On the other hand, if there's not enough samadhi, so when not enough samadhi, you find the mind is unable to remain fixed on the object. It can become easily distracted. Okay? So in this case, you can counter this by reducing the number of touch points to note. You can reduce it even to just one touch point, clear touch point. Reduce. Don't even note the sitting, just touch point, not touching. Or you can just reduce it to just noting sitting without the touch point. That means just one object. Okay? This will help to bring up, strengthen the samadhi. Okay? Now, if you are noting rising, falling as your primary object, then the sitting and touching is often added. The noting of sitting and touching is often added to the noting of rising, falling. Once the mindfulness and concentration has been sufficiently developed. So, because when the mindfulness and concentration develops, the clarity of mind also develop. Okay? When the clarity of mind develop, you begin to discern the objects more and more clearly. Am I able to discern more and more objects, especially the more subtle objects start to become clearer. So the mind begin to pick up more and more objects. Okay, so when you first begin, when the mindfulness and concentration is not sufficiently developed yet, there's not much clarity. So when you're not rising, falling, you find that noting is very rough. There's just one whole rising, one whole falling. So it's very rough. But once the mindfulness and concentration is well developed, sufficiently developed, the clarity of mind develops, and noting becomes more and more refined. Then you begin to notice more and more fine, subtle objects. So when noting rising, you notice that it's not just one whole rising, but there's many, many fine rising, one after another. Then so you keep noting rising, another rising, one after another. Then you notice that when you come to the end of it, the last rising, you notice there's a pause, a gap there, before the falling occur. Okay? So this was not clear earlier, when the mindfulness and concentration not well developed yet, the mind is not clear. You don't notice this pause, this gap in between. You're not rising, immediately is falling, falling, immediately is rising. But now, once you're developed properly, the mind is refined, you can see clearly. You're not rising, 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 and then you notice it stopped for a while before it falls. There's a gap in the noting. Okay? Now, because there's a gap there, you notice the mind is not noting anything. Right? So when you report this to the teacher will ask you, now you have to fill in the gap by noting, sitting and touching. Right? So you can note rising, 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 and there's a gap there, then you go and note touching, 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 touching. Okay? Or you note rising, 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 and sitting, 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 sitting. And then falling, 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 sitting, sitting, sitting. Okay? Or you can feel it with touching, rising, 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 touching, 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 falling, 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 touching, touching, touching. But if the gap is very long, you can feel it with sitting and touching. It's rising, 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 sitting, sitting, touching, touching, then falling, 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 sitting, sitting, touching, touching. Okay, so you have to fill in the gaps. Okay, so that the noting is continuous. There's no gap in the noting. Okay, so this is important, because only if the noting is continuous without gap, then the mindfulness, the concentration can continue to develop. Okay? And then the clarity of mind also can continue to develop. Right? Okay, we stop here tonight.